was actually scouted by Duncan's ex-boss at the time, who was the head of IBM Watson for Europe, who I met originally at a conference for AI. And I showed some of the projects I had worked on, and he quickly suggested that I just interview with him, and then quickly after that join the team. And immediately after joining, I was put in Duncan's team, who managed me and who put me on a whole bunch of really interesting projects. And yeah, that's how we met.
From the inside, Watson was a bit crazy, to be honest. There was a lot of money at the time, and there was a lot of just go and make stuff happen, even though I think all of us knew the technology was still very, very early and very immature. But there was a lot of push to make stuff happen, and it was run like a startup internally within IBM. So none of the usual kind of big corporate policies, very much a different culture. So it was fun, real fun.
I got to work on some really interesting projects that Duncan put me on. Some of it was open source. Got some traction, especially internally within IBM. IBM somehow happened to be one of the very first big movers in the AI space, and it all started with an internal project called Watson that got a lot of publicity when it won at the Jeopardy game against humans. Because it's a big sales organization with marketing and all that, they figured that if they invested in this room, I think it was 1 million in London and multiple millions in New York, they could just wow potential clients that would enter and make them believe that essentially AI back then was where it is today, which bear in mind that was like 10 years ago, so we were nowhere near.
The Watson room was a room in IBM's office in South Bank, which was dedicated to Watson. And lots of sensors on the ceiling, and you had a wand and you walked across the room and the sensors knew where you were, so lots of screens could react to your presence and your position in the room.
I had been following Watson since obviously before I worked there, and I was thinking to myself, okay, so they're really good at doing research and AI is going in the right direction and something will happen. Now, I tend to think that most of the time the first mover doesn't really win. They had arguably the best natural language processing, natural language understanding software at the time, and they were pushing it a lot on the sales side, but they weren't able to get to essentially what happened with Transformers that, again, was written by Google, but even them, OpenAI kind of ended up adopting it and pushing it before they did, even though Google seems to be catching up right now. I believed in it. I knew it was going to happen. Did I believe IBM was going to win? Probably not, but I thought it'd be interesting to be part of the story at the time.
I believed in the possibility of the technology, not so much in the specific nature of the Watson technology and what had won the Jeopardy program, because I think at the time it was clear to everybody that didn't really exist as a product or as something that was a thing that you could really sell to a customer. And so what we were involved in at the time was trying to translate the possibilities into what was actually practical. And I think at the time we all believed that lots of things were possible. Although in hindsight, I think we were probably ahead of the reality. But there was a lot of conviction, I think. I think everybody in Watson at the time, I think, was pretty convicted that this was an exciting period. So what finally, I think, convinced me or convinced us to move, I think, was just the feeling of this was the time when lots of things were possible. It was the opportunity to do something where you had more control over your life, over how things were being done. No surprise that a company like IBM has a lot of kind of process, a lot of kind of bureaucracy and politics, and I think it's not to say anything bad about IBM. It's no different from any large organization of that size. But for me, it was definitely a chance to like escape that kind of like corporate straitjacket, if you like. And this was the chance because AI was happening. It was the big thing, and this is the chance to do something different.
I had already had some experience in the startup world, having tried to do my own. and not done too well, but got some exposure. And Duncan wanting something different. I think he said, well, JD, you've been working with me on different projects. It seems like what you've done is interesting. We could build something together. So he approached me, and he said, let's go do something. And his original idea really was to do something not too far from what we're doing at Barnacle Labs, somewhat ironically. But me having had done a lot of just products in the past, I figured we need to try to hone in onto something, and we kind of had this idea of doing a better salesy customer support platform backed by bots, but that was before Transformers, so before the ChatGPTs and all that. So very much your chat bot at the bottom right of your screen, and we somehow managed to use all the latest technology and build some really good systems, but due to many reasons, including COVID at some point, and including just us not at the time being quite knowledgeable enough about sales and pushing things enough, I think, and just structurally things being hard in that space, we weren't able to get this product to where it should have been in the hands of the right people.
But it also turned out to be a massively crowded marketplace, didn't it?
Yeah.
You know, when we started out, there was probably a small number of players, but you know, after a couple of years, there was like tens, if not hundreds, of chatbot platforms out there.
One of the things that was there at the beginning was this idea that, well, at the beginning of Humanise, that wasn't there in other products, which is kind of crazy when you think about it today, was this idea of handing off to a human agent. So the bot would perform some actions, and then it would hand off to a human.
Yeah.
And that's something we ended up saying, well, that's going to be the thing, let's build it. And there was definitely some naivete there, because it turns out even in large products that were already established, like Intercom and Drift and the likes, it was reasonably easy for them to implement that. Now, we had other features, but it was reasonably easy for them to do that. And there were a lot of products from everywhere doing similar things.
I think I came to the conclusion that that whole concept was actually faulty, because what we discovered was that a lot of organizations, they don't have a team sitting there waiting to take the conversation. So somebody's there chatting with the AI, and the AI says, oh, I need a human to help me. Hands over to a human, and there's no human there.
Yeah.
Or the human takes 10 minutes to turn up because they're busy on some other chat. And unless you're like a massive company like Amazon or something, and you've got like teams of people sitting there waiting to chat, for a lot of the companies we were trying to target, which were sort of mid-sized, they just didn't have the teams to make that a practical reality. So the whole human handover thing was a fallacy in reality.
And when it does work, I'm assuming most of the time you don't really hand off to a human. It covers most of the conversation.
Yeah.
And then you're probably down to email after, and that's probably the right thing to do.
You had this kind of like very crowded marketplace. So right, what's your reaction to that? Is you get an industry vertical focus. So we went into hospitality, and then COVID hit, and the entire customer base shuts down. So it wasn't exactly ideal. To Humanise, I think we would probably do what we're doing now, which was the original concept before we got distracted by building a product, which seemed really exciting at the time. I think I would probably use our skills to focus on enterprise market and build things for customers where there's a clear demand.
And I think what we realized was we knew we were reasonably good at building products. So we knew how to build products, we knew how to build solutions, and it's much easier if you're self-funding your project. So right now what we're doing in Barnacle Labs, which is what Labs is in there, is that on the one hand, we do build products and we work on projects for customers, but on the other, we do have internal projects we're working on. So open source libraries, entire projects, like the Minerva one we're working on, research going on also, that we are simply investing in from the money we make. I
think it was essentially getting access to GPT-3. There was this rumor going around that there was this new technology from OpenAI. It was all sort of behind closed doors. You couldn't get access to it. So I stalked people who worked there on LinkedIn and sent them messages saying, please, 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 could I get early access? And I think there were some people on Twitter saying, oh, this guy gave me access. So then I was looking him up and sending him emails. And one of these guys felt sorry for us and gave us access. And we started building it into our products at the time. And it was a bit like the Wild West. It was like GPT-3. So this is pre-ChatGPT. This is the model prior to ChatGPT. It was very rough. It would hallucinate like crazy. It was very hard to control. But we saw the future, the difference between what that model was capable of, even though it was very early, and the sort of prior technologies we've been using in Humanise at the time was enormous. And I think that sort of the penny dropped, and we essentially went, hold on a minute, the whole world's going to change very soon. And either we need to take this technology and re-engineer the thing we built around it, or we need to start again in some fashion. We kind of looked at it and said, hold on, we could re-engineer our product around this stuff, but it's going to take a lot of effort, and we'd still be in this super crowded marketplace. So that doesn't really make an awful lot of sense. So it makes more sense to do something different and to say, okay, this is the spark. GPT-3 is the spark for a new wave of AI, and let's try and work out how we can do something useful and sensible using it. Let's try and figure it out.
But even before that, I remember you telling me, oh, check out these transformers. They're interesting. And I was like, okay, let's have a look. And we started looking at it, and you were telling me this is definitely going to be the future. And I was just thinking to myself, I don't know, probably they seem to hallucinate a whole bunch. But then a couple months later, we started looking at the trajectory of things, and you could clearly see that these things were going to get better. You know, it was GPT-2 that we actually had, because GPT-2 was open source. So we actually, in the product at the time, we looked into doing tool calling, for anyone who knows what that is. That's what a lot of the agents now are built on, using GPT-2 at the time, which kind of worked sometimes, but most of the time not. And internally in the product, we were trying to do that. And then, yeah, everything you said happened when we were just, like, no, this probably doesn't make sense within this product, within this company, and there is no real funding behind us. So we're probably going to have to do something entirely different, whether it's a different product, or in this case, something more like Barnacle, where we work with companies to help them build products, which I don't even think Palantir was on our radar at the time, but that's kind of what they do, really. And it's to some degree what we're doing at Barnacle Labs also. So the idea is not that with every customer we have to, reinvent the wheel. We want to be able to reuse a lot of what has been done. We invest in assets and research, and then what we do there is meant to accelerate massively what goes on in projects. And they don't start from zero, essentially. So whenever we start a project, you virtually never start from zero, because there's all the knowledge, stuff we've already built that can just be deployed quite quickly.
I mean, we were very lucky to get the National Cancer Institute as our first customer. It was a kind of inspiring piece of work with an inspiring customer, because we felt like we weren't just building tech products. We were, in some tiny fashion, helping to advance cancer research and to improve people's lives. And that kind of, I think that made a big difference to both of us. And I think we both have a kind of like a real interest in that space. And I mean, my sister became very sick with cancer at the time. So for me personally, there was a real kind of connection with that particular project and that client that went beyond the kind of usual business stuff.
It went from, we can just, make a bit of money and live, to, we can actually do something meaningful. Yeah. It wasn't so much how we worked that it taught us about. It was more, how we work together is more how we work with others. We ended up having to hire a couple of people who worked on the project, but also partnering up with Google, who also had a couple of their people on the project. So we were really lucky to be able to work through Google for this project for for some reason it was easier, but it was also really handy to have them as a partner on this. What ended up happening was that they put a project manager on it, and it was really interesting to see what the dynamics were between us working on the project at first and then handing over to some of our developers.
I think for me, the big thing about that work was the creativity, because it wasn't, so many times in corporate development, somebody gives you a requirement and it's, you crank the handle and you build something, you build some screens and you build some technology and it meets the requirement. But that project was very much something where we weren't told what the answer was. We had this sort of vague backdrop, and it was our job to to try and work out what was possible and to come up with ideas and to come to the NCI and say, hey, we've got this crazy idea that maybe we could do this. Does this make any sense? And I think that kind of injection of creativity and the like thinking about the problem, not just cranking the handle to meet a requirement.
Well, I think we work quite differently, firstly, on these things. I spend a lot of time agonizing over how a solution should be implemented and researching, going quite broad. And I need to have something to work on in order to do that. And all of a sudden I will hyper-focus for weeks at a time sometimes, trying to map the world in a certain way, and make it fit. But Duncan is much more of let's act now. and so he will do something immediately, which is super useful because actually it gets me into gear when he does something on a project, because I will review it and go like, no, so it will frustrate me because it's not how I see things. And then I will spend two nights on things, just not sleeping, trying to make it look better. Whereas if I had agonized over thinking about everything, it would have taken me much longer if I didn't have him to get me started on something by just getting something out of the gates. And I think one of the things, like, it's this like old adage, right? Good enough is better than perfect. I think Duncan really does live that to some degree. I'm trying to get there, but I'm not really there yet. I still go like, okay, how could it perfectly be?
But there's a definite strategy that I use, which is left to his own devices, JD will think forever about a problem. and so that, but he gets really irritated if he sees something he doesn't like. So the best strategy to get JD to like jumpstart his thinking is to show him something he dislikes, and then he'll be so annoyed by it, he'll then have to rebuild it immediately.
On any social media platform, you find this new model, this new company came out. Here's all the things it can do, and then you have this list, and it beats all these benchmarks, and it's like, really? But it's not really better when you use it live, and it doesn't really do other things. And it's just like a lot of it is just clickbaity. There's a lot of overpromising. There's quite a bit of a disconnect between what people seem to think is going on versus where the research is at. And a lot of really good research has been done a while back, but hasn't really been implemented yet, and people aren't aware of it. So there's just these gaps between what people promising and think the state of things is right now and what is actually possible, feasible.
If a client asks for something that you think doesn't make sense, the difficulty is that's what they've asked for. But I think we have a responsibility to say, actually, maybe this is more complicated than you think, or maybe this isn't going to work very well, or whatever. I think it's always difficult, but I think I view it as our responsibility to give honest advice. Well, I think it's easy for me. It's agents. I think we're on this path to these autonomous agents, and what we have today is, version 0.1. It's going to be another 10 years of progressing how these things work and building out the infrastructure around it and getting more sophisticated versions. And I mean, I see, the jump from month to month right now in terms of what you can do with an agent is incredible. I mean, 18 months ago, I was telling people don't bother with agents. It's just marketing hype. And now I'm saying to people, you should do everything with agents.
Yeah, I think that's somewhat clear about agents, but there are adjacent, we'll say, and requirements for it, and different ways in which things could happen. So I think, as mentioned, about like we're going to get to a state where most things are run by agents within companies and in our lives also. But there are multiple paths there. There's the extremely high capex. We're going to have these really, really powerful LLMs from really large companies build and be every single agent out there, or we're going to rely more on open source models, so small language models, which I find quite interesting. And yeah, there was a recent report by NVIDIA, report or paper, however you want to look at it, that looked at how you could use small language models and save a lot of money and make things more efficient when using agents. It's clear to me that because one of the requirements is being really good at tool calling and doing all sorts of various things, you can actually fine-tune small language models, and which is any model with roughly less than 10 billion parameters, and actually get to a very similar place quite a bit faster and much cheaper also. Essentially, the path there is going to be hugely different. Is going to have an impact on NVIDIA and all the other large companies that produce chips. And I think it's going to be, there's a way to create a sort of brain, essentially with small language models. And one of the things that I think hasn't really been solved properly, and we're looking at it a lot right now, is memory and how shared memory states occur within agents. And so you have two different levels of memories, really. You have what is the memory that is embedded within the parameters of the models. So the LLMs actually being used within every agent. And then you have, well, what is the memory, which is the general context and is going to be put into every run of the LLMs. What is that done? Where is that used? But where is that structured? And right now, one of the best implementation of agents is Claude Code, and they literally just use the file system for it. And then they use grep, which is this Unix command line tool, to just search through it, which is a terribly inefficient way to do things. And I think the future will be graphs and much more information in there, and creating these kinds of shared brains that the agents communicate with. And it's going to be quite complex and really interesting. And there's going to be models on top of these kind of shared states of memory. So memory is going to be a big thing. I think then, well, we're investing a lot in biotech, so we think biotech is really the future in the next few years, and it's going to entirely transform how things are done. And it's not just going to be agents; it's going to be models that are acting in a quite orthogonal. We're using quite orthogonal inputs from just text. Read a sequence of amino acids from protein and figure out how it folds. I mean, like AlphaFold 3, that's something people can't really do just by looking at an amino acid sequence. But that's going to be extremely transformative. So it's not just going to be LLMs or these kinds of models based on language. It's going to be a lot of different things that are going to be super powerful. Some people say that there is too much hype and everything's overvalued. There might be a bubble. So that's a concern, trying to figure out if there is a bubble now. There is obviously they're going to take over kind of argument, and we're all afraid of we're going to become slaves to the AI and the robots. Is that really something that concerns me right now? Not really, but it could eventually. And that's why I could say it's hard to really be precise about these things, I think, there.
I think for me, the answer is the sort of enshittification, which was a word I came across recently as a book about it, which is why I'm allowed to use the word. That's the title of the book, where AI is used for things which are not good for society. A good example
100%.
for me anyway, not everyone's going to agree with this, but a good example would be OpenAI comes out with Sora 2, the new video generation model, and they don't just launch it as a model, they launch it as a social media app. And I'm not a big fan of social media personally. We don't need another social media app that's full of AI slop, as they say. For me, AI can do lots of amazing things, and that's not one of the things.
I guess the vision for Barnacle is to be obviously both a lab that does novel research in the space, not necessarily at the model level, although we do that, but definitely the how do all these things work together and how can you implement things such that it really has an impact. We see ourselves as being one of the, if all goes well, one of the large actors, at least in Europe and potentially worldwide, at getting large organizations.
One of the organizations who can help people to make sense of what's going on, this hugely complicated, noisy, confusing world of AI and hype and continuously changing technology. I think we're the kind of the sense makers who can kind of parse all of that nonsense and make sense of it and tell people what's really real and help them decide what that means for them, and then help them build stuff that actually has an impact. And I think not just like small proof of concepts, but to build those breakthroughs. That's what we're in this game, not to help people build small things. We're in this game to help build the next breakthrough.